Hello, I'm Dominic Davies, founder of Pink Therapy. We've been training mental health specialists worldwide to work with gender, sex, and relationship diverse clients for many years. This podcast puts the lives of some of these incredible, pioneering therapists front and center and gives us insights into what it's like to be LGBTIQA+, or as we prefer, GSRD, speaking in their words. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, or good evening, or good night, wherever you are in the world listening to us. It's really great that you're here, and I'm excited to be speaking to one of our recent graduates, Julian, who's going to be talking to us about his experience of becoming a GSRD therapist. So, Julian, how about you start off with your name and your pronouns and where you are?
Yeah. So hi, everyone, and thanks, Dominic, for having me. So my name is Julian-Pascal Saadi, and I use he, him pronouns, and I am based in London, United Kingdom.
You have a very interesting name, which I think speaks to a complex history. Do you want to say anything about that, about those different intersectional identities that you have?
Yeah, so I do have a bit of a complex history. I was born in Australia, but my dad is half Lebanese, half Ghanaian from Western Africa, hence the Saadi. So I've got the Lebanese side of me. I don't speak Arabic, unfortunately. I wish I did. It's the one language I'm still dying to learn. So I've got that side of the family, but raised in between Australia and Brazil for my adolescence. I lived in Rio for 6 years. So I've lived around in a few different places.
That's an exciting place to be having your adolescence, I'd have thought.
Absolutely.
I went to Sao Paulo for a visit, and about a decade ago, and I was quite frightened at times. It wasn't the kind of sunshine party place that I thought it was going to be. It was, one had to keep one's wits about one with people who knew what they were doing. Although I wasn't as terrified there as I was in some other parts. And then other times you're just sitting on the street and you're having fantastic brunches and everything feels like completely safe. And I think it's just my lack of my Western experience coming in and not knowing what's okay, what's not okay. So where are you working in London, and what do you do?
So I am very passionate about the public healthcare model generally. So I work for the public healthcare service in the UK, what we call the National Health Service, or the NHS. I work with complex needs. So predominantly people with developmental trauma, and with diagnoses around personality disorder, and trauma-based presentations, essentially. But I also lecture at Metanoia Institute, 1 day a week, and I lecture on the doctorate program for trainee psychologists and integrative psychotherapists. And I also run my private practice. So I'm kind of spread.
Quite busy.
Yeah, I am. I'm quite busy. But in a way that means that it's varied, which was important for me. And it means that I can engage in this kind of work across different spheres, which was also important for me. And we'll get into that a little bit later, I'm sure.
Okay. So I have a question that I ask everyone about what is life like for GSRD folk where you live. And you've lived in lots of different places. So, whether you want to pick up on living and working in the West End, in the East End, or in other places, kind of give us a bit of an insight into how things have been in your experience.
It's a really good question. I think it's been very varied. Growing up in Australia is pretty much, it's completely Western. So in terms of what it's like. I'd say that it's similar between Australia and the UK, meaning that there's some kind of social tolerability and acceptance, and we've got a lot of the same kind of legal opportunities currently, which is very different to how it used to be. That being said, I'm very interested in how hostility gets expressed more covertly, which I've certainly experienced, living in the UK where we're supposedly a very tolerant society. But actually there's a lot of hostility that can come through in the form of microaggressions. And I work within the NHS, it's a very heteronormative setting. So being queer means that I'm not the majority. And so I'm constantly hearing and sensing just very subtle comments that are kind of designed to reinforce an idea that I'm not like others or something like that. So I think that's an interesting kind of experience. Whereas if I think about Brazil and Rio, that was more overtly hostile. It was.
So you knew where you stood in a way.
I knew where I stood. It was slightly more black and white. Over here, there's this sense of, I don't know whether you meant to hurt me, but I feel hurt. I don't know what to do with this feeling, Whereas in Brazil, I know where I stand. Not that makes it any better, because in a way, I can recognize my body immediately goes back into a kind of a bit of a trauma state when I'm back in Rio. Immediately I'm vigilant. I'm looking around. I'm conscious of my mannerisms in ways that I maybe would be less so here. So I can feel my nervous system kick into a different gear when I go back to Brazil.
That's kind of what I was referring to about my time in Sao Paulo. That and that I was, I saw a carjacking right in front of me, which was something that I've never seen before. And that was the terrifying of teenage kids with a gun at the window. And my driver, the colleague, was saying, they're just off their faces on drugs, and they don't care whether they shoot or not because they've got nothing to lose. They're absolutely living in poverty. So they will shoot and run, having stolen your bag. So there is that level of, can my campness give me away and betray something? And is anyone going to be bothered? But maybe they will be. But then there's also that, is kind of watch my back for danger. So it's two levels of hypervigilance.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because sometimes, we talk about those memories that have really stuck with us, or things that people have said that just seem to have ripple effects in our entire lives. And when I was an adolescent, I remember there was a story on the news about how these two male identified friends hugged on the beach, just saying goodbye. Two heterosexual men hugged, and they were presumed to be gay, and they were murdered in Rio.
Wow.
Yeah, and I wasn't out at the time, so it really kind of struck a chord, and it just let me know what kind of fate awaited me, if ever, I was. So that's how I ended up taking on that experience anyway.
Wow. Yes. Yeah. And you were kind of talking about working in the NHS and the microaggressions and micro-invalidations and stuff that can happen in a more nuanced way with the Brits and others who are here, because it's there's lots of different cultures around us. Do you wear your lanyard? Do you wear your rainbow lanyard at work? Or
I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
And do you think that makes a difference? How does that impact things?
It's a very good question. I'm very interested in this topic. I think I work in quite a psychodynamic way, and I think that my lanyard carries meaning with it. So it's a lanyard that's just got the LGBT flag on it. So it carries meaning, and I've found that those clients who notice it explicitly, the topic of queerness becomes a part of the therapy. in some way, in a way that wasn't possible when I didn't wear my lanyard. So it just kind of brings something in and expands the work. I've just found it really, 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 really interesting to witness that.
So for the cognoscenti, it either unconsciously gives permission for the hostility to emerge, or for there be no hostility, but a sense of being able to feel safer in terms of psychological safety and work at a deeper level, perhaps.
That's exactly it. It's sort of experiencing both sides, having one very straight cisgender man making quite hostile comments towards me and feminine men, but then it became an integral part of the work, and it really, really was a turning point for him in the therapy. Whereas for someone else, it kind of opened up the possibility of her own queerness, which she hadn't thought about in 20 years. So,
wow.
Yeah, I think there's something that it kind of brings in.
Interesting, very interesting. Yeah. What are some of the current challenges facing your clients, do you feel?
I think particularly for our trans and gender non-conforming clients, I think the UK's political situation at the moment is horrific when it comes to trans issues and trans healthcare. And I think to have to face that on a it's just horrible. I mean, it's really, really deeply sad. And it's shameful, actually. It's really, really shameful. So I think that's the first thing that comes to mind is what is going on there. It's almost like there needs to, we talk a lot about recognizing the damage that's done to marginalized community. And we talk a lot about this within anti-racism work, for example. And I'm sort of thinking, well, at what point are we going to recognize the damage done to our trans siblings and start to repair that so that they do feel safe? So for me, that's probably the main thing that comes to mind. But having said that, myself being a queer identified cisgender man, I say queer because sometimes the label gay doesn't fully.
I'm with you on that. I often don't feel like I belong to the gay community or the gay male community. Yeah.
Exactly. I think the problems that I face are very different. For me, it's more in the realm of microaggressions and feeling like my queerness is irrelevant in some ways, when actually in my experience, it's not irrelevant and it's important to talk about. And it's, I think about issues that I've had with supervisors around this kind of thing. And so I think specifically for GSRD clients as well, in the context of therapy, I think there is a bit of a gap in terms of as a society, do we know what it means to really center queerness as part of our thinking? I mean, we do when we think about it and we train in this, but I'm talking more within sort of heteronormative contexts like the NHS. I think that there's a gap in accessibility, for example. I think about how many queer clients go through the referral process and never once get asked how they identify. I've spoken to people in teams who, what one particular individual sort of said to me, well, it's not my business to know whether or not this person is gay. That was his language. And sort of thinking, oh my God, there's so much work to be done here. Yeah. And
that's kind of bizarre given how the NHS has responded to AIDS and HIV 40, 50 years ago. 40 years ago. It's like, come on, you guys, you really pulled it together then. What on earth has happened since then? Because before then, they would never think of asking about, people close to your partner or whatever. It would just, but a lot of improvement happened in the NHS around the time of AIDS, and really needed. And so it's kind of concerning that there are still people who feel like it's an intrusion. It's an intrusion into someone's privacy of their bedroom, which is probably what he was feeling, rather than just wanting to know about their lives.
You know, when I heard that comment, because this was in the context of me saying we need to be asking all of our clients, regardless of whatever sexuality we presume they identify as or with, what their sexualities are, what their gender identities are. So that was in response to that. And there's this sense of, when he said that, what I was hearing was the typical, it's fine for you to be gay, but just don't tell me, or just don't show me. It's, it's none of my business. So it just had resonances with that typical kind of narrative. It really threw me when I heard that.
And yet it is the business of the therapist or the practitioner, whoever's helping us, because they need to take account of the minority stress aspects of how it is for us to be in the world, and to screen for suicidal ideation, and to maybe screen for substance misuse and self-harm, and ways in which we might not be taking care of ourselves, and how well supported we are in society. So it's absolutely their business to have that question and then just open up a conversation. I think you're absolutely right. Okay, so there's more to be done. What are you passionate about, Julian?
I'm very interested in the issue of, and I say the issue, even that language is problematic, the topic of queerness in heteronormative spaces. I work, as I said, I work in the public healthcare system. And I'm conscious that, and I've had this conflict within myself where there's a part of me that thinks, well, maybe I go and I work for a sexual health service or a charity for LGBT clients, or something that I just know that there'll be people like me around. And I need that and I want that. But at the same time, I feel like I also want to improve this space over here, the space that I'm currently in. Because then I think, well, if I go over there, then who's going to do this work? So there's this kind of pull within myself. So I'm very, very passionate about making normative systems or heteronormative systems much more queer inclusive. So I'm constantly talking about the topic of queerness and GSRD issues within my role. I'm very, very interesting about the meaning that queerness takes on for clients as well, regardless of whatever their sexualities or gender identities are. When I think of queerness, I think of something that's kind of non-normative or expansive or revolutionary, or, I think of something really exciting, actually. And I think from that lens, it can bring something really interesting into the therapy. So those are kind of my interests. It's kind of, how do I bring all of this knowledge about queerness into a space where queerness doesn't get thought about? And what then happens to the space when queerness is introduced?
Lovely. Yeah. So queerness is being understood as being something just outside the mainstream. In what ways are you queer? In what ways do you live your life outside the mainstream of your peers, of your class or your community or whatever? How do you queer things up? I think that's a tough one about leaving a location in order to make for the big city or to make for safety. I really admire people who stay living in rural surroundings and do their work in those contexts, whether you're the only gay in the village or whether you're up in the northeast or whatever, and you don't think you have your tribe is bigger, maybe online, outside. Because I actually, living in Brighton, I love the fact that I'm surrounded by queer visibility, and that my world is fed and nurtured. My work is fed and nurtured by contact with my queer siblings. So I would find it really hard being in mainstream now. Once you've left it, it's really hard to go back in, I think.
I think it's a really interesting point, and something that I really resonate with. And genuinely, I feel like I live this conflict on a daily basis where that I've always felt like a lack of a sense of community, whether what that's about, but I really, there's a real struggle or a conflict within me where I would love to be a part of a bigger community. And yet at the same time, I worry about all the queers that are going through the heteronormative NHS systems without any kind of queer cuddle or something, I think about the me that would have gone through that service and how grateful I would have been to have had a me somewhere. And that's what that then buffers against my need to be part of it.
That's great. Yeah. It's a tough call. And I think, you can do your time in the trenches. And then when you're ready, you can step outside and come into the hearth and the fireside of the family in cosy private practice, working with other queers.
Absolutely. That's the plan.
What motivated you, turning to that program, the diploma program, what motivated you to undertake that? Because, you've already got a doctorate, you've got a lot of training under your belt, you're well informed about queerness. But what made you decide, I need to do this course?
Because I needed to nurture little queer Julian. I needed to nurture that side of me. I needed to nurture myself.
So you came for yourself, for your personal self as much as any professional identity. It was about little Julian.
I think it was about little Julian. There was a gap in my training, but I don't think that that's what ultimately motivated me to really go through it. And I think before I started the course, I would have thought that it was just down to the gap. But now, having done the course, I look back and I think, well, what did I get from that? And what I got was that nurturing, a sense of being mirrored. And also, I'm so much more confident in myself because of that. Like, really, I'm so grateful for this course because it's helped me get in touch with my own passion, which in some ways I wasn't able to do before because little Julian was kind of just wasn't fully being heard, seen, hugged by me. So it was as much for me as it was about just kind of filling in a gap in my training. Yeah.
Right. That's a joy to hear you point to that personal development aspect, because I think that's a really important part of the program, especially the work we try to do at the very beginning in that 2-week intensive, to have conversations with each other that we might never have been able to have had before, and create a safe enough container for those to happen that can then carry on. And it's really that development of the self is really underexplored, I think. And so I'm glad it worked for you, and that you could take that and to hear about the confidence, because that's fantastic.
There's this, it's almost the word ancestry came to mind as you were just talking there. It was like engaging with the reading made me engage with the ancestor. I mean, not just ancestors, but the kind of the history backing me and my own identity in a way that I didn't have access to before. It's like, oh wait, no, hang on. A lot of people are thinking about this, and it was just that was so empowering for me.
Yeah, we are all standing on the shoulders of giants, really. I think, and that's really valuable to realise that others worked on this before we came along, even though this is still a very new and pioneering field. There were others in the trenches for a while beforehand, and I'm grateful that they're there. What was the most interesting part of the program for you? Was there a particular module or element of it that you found particularly helpful?
I think probably the coming out module. I thought it was really interesting because I guess as queer people, we live that conflict every day around what it means to be out. And certainly for myself, working in the NHS, and I wear a lanyard, and it's not like I'm stating my identity, because a lot of allies wear a lanyard too, but it certainly adds in, there's something about ambiguity in the topic of coming out that really, really resonated with me around the difficulty of adhering to a kind of a binary, I'm out or I'm not, and how for me in my life, that hasn't been a realistic goal because of my heritage as well, and my own background, and half my family isn't aware of my, so there's so much there for me to hold. So that was probably on an emotionally resonant level. That was probably the most engaging for me, but they were all very engaging.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think every time I ask the question, I get different answers. And I think that speaks to something about the strength of the course, that it's different things to different people. Yeah. And how has it changed your practice as a clinician?
I never quite understood how to integrate the social world with the internal world in my practice with clients. I'd always struggle. I'd either focus too much on, early relational dynamics as a way of understanding what's happening, or I'd focus exclusively on the impact of oppression and have no way of thinking about how those two things interact. And that is one skill that I took away from the course, and I feel there's like oh my God, thank God, I figured that out, because I was so aware of how unable I felt before. And now, so there's something about things coming together like an integration. And I just feel a lot quicker in terms of my ability to think about the social in tandem with the personal. This idea of the personal is political. It completely resonates with me now in terms of what that means theoretically and practically. And the idea of affirmative practice as well, that there is a need to do more than just the traditional way of doing therapy, that there are certain things that need to be done or said in the interest of the client. Which departed from my traditional training.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, you're just speaking against the idea of therapist neutrality there, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah. The thing that so many therapists from privileged positions and positions of power think is possible, and yet completely miss a whole raft of material and allyship and connection and healing, really. I think that's where it is. It's that being able to integrate the social context on somebody's history and help them, support them integrating that in themselves is where the work goes. So recommend me a book or a film.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. The one that comes to mind would be a series, actually. I really like Schitt's Creek. Yeah, it's like a really nice Christmas movie kind of feeling. Like, that's the feeling I get when I watch Schitt's Creek. It's like I'm coming home. I don't know why the reference to Christmas, but it's that feeling.
Yeah, it is like a big hug in a family. These quirky people. And I think the stories and the relationships developed as the series went on. At the beginning, I thought it was very funny, but I was laughing more at them. As I got further in, particularly around the time that David fell in love, that whole love story was just really beautiful, really transformative, I thought. And it settled everything,
Totally.
So I agree with you. I think it's a fabulous series. I should revisit it, actually, because I think it's one of those ones that probably bears repeating.
Absolutely. And it was I think it's probably one of the first things that I've watched that didn't make queerness this big thing. It was just completely normalized, which was just so against the typical narratives that follow a gay or a queer couple in a story about a lot of straight and cisgender people.
Yeah, no, there didn't seem to be any visible, tangible homophobia at all. It was just completely normalized, which is entirely how it should be, really. It's like, yeah, you, it's whatever, it's no big deal. You're welcome. Yeah, you matter. Cool. So, as a fairy, I'm a bona fide fairy, according to myself and lots of other people. I'm going to grant you 3 wishes. What would you wish for?
The first one, I wish for a world in which queerness doesn't scare people. I think there's such a need in the world for openness that in recent years just seems to have gotten more and more difficult somehow on a social and a political level. So I wish for that. I wish for the damage done to the GSRD community to be recognized by non-GSRD folk and to be repaired. I'm very psychodynamic, so I'm all about the kind of guilt and repair and ruptures and all of that.
Okay, right.
So, there's something in that around the need to face the damage that's been done, as opposed to continuing to try and convince us that we're overreacting, which then speaks to this idea around the microaggressions that we experience and how we can get gaslit into believing that we're just too sensitive or that people didn't mean it or whatever. So there's something about a need for recognition there on a very kind of primal level, recognizing my pain and not trying to deny it anymore. Right. Recognizing our pain, our collective pain and shame as well. And maybe I just wish for a world in which we were all a little bit more queer. Maybe there's something about, at the beginning of today, we thought about how the gay label can be quite restricting in some ways. And it's a label that I used to identify with for years until I suddenly sort of thought, hang on, but do I, does that actually encapsulate my whole entire experience? No, it really doesn't. So the possibility of queering our own identities a little bit more so that we could just be a little bit more open as a society to each other's otherness, why does it have to be so scary?
Yeah, I think subversion. I think of queer as being subverting the norms, and I felt like, gayness just felt like it was putting me into a whole set of other rules and regulations and boxes, and that I didn't want to be in. So it felt queer is more liberating. So for everybody to feel that they could claim their queerness, whatever that was for them, be you.
Exactly.
Yeah, lovely. All right, I'll grant those wishes. That would be great. So thanks ever so much for a lovely chat. And I really appreciate you making time for this. It's been great engaging with you in this way. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure to be able to talk about this.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please click like and subscribe to hear when the next one is released. If you're a therapist looking to enhance your knowledge and skills with GSRD clients, please check out our training website, pinktherapy.org. We run 1- and 2-year specialist training programs online, as well as offer a wide range of short CPD modules. Thanks again for listening to On Becoming a GSRD Therapist.